So we're going to take a look at the topic of reason for God based upon Tim Keller's book of the same name. And the first thing we got to take a look at is the topic of doubting doubt. Nothing wrong with doubt, but we got to take a closer look at them, right? Now, so let's do a little warm-up. And we got a little story here. George was cleaning the windows on the 25th floor of an office block when there was a massive power failure. The electric hoist on the window cleaning platform was immobilized. How did George manage to get down safely before the power was restored? Yeah, right. He wasn't outside. He was inside the building. So the assumption we had kind of led us down the wrong path, right? So we got to look at assumptions. We got to look at the framework which we live in and think in. The purpose of this class is to explore belief and reason, especially regarding God, Christianity, and ourselves. Pretty big, tall order, right? So what are we? See, what are we, as human beings? What do we believe and why? And not just believers asking ourselves these questions, but also non-believers. Why do we believe what we believe? We want to take a look at making a reasonable case for Christianity. In particular, is reason the enemy of faith, as is so often portrayed in the movies? You're kind of your philosophy professor in college, right? Examining and thinking differently about doubts, right? So taking a look at what doubts are and why we have them. Are the doubts valid? We got to think differently because, let's look at this quote from philosopher Thomas Nagel, saying, "I want atheism to be true, and I'm made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers." So what does this suggest? Well, I think we can see a couple things here. And of course, here he's acknowledging that a lot of intelligent people, well-informed people, are actually religious. But the more important thing is he wants atheism to be true. And when you want something like that, it kind of, maybe it may color your thinking, right? Maybe it may give you some blind spots. Now, of course, here's the book by Tim Keller, The Reason for God. Here, the table of contents, and we're going to cover, a lot of these. So what is the place of reason in Christianity? Now, this is not necessarily from the book, it's just from that book, but from other books, which is, what is the place of reason? Does it have a place at all? What were the consequences of declaring belief in Jesus as the Son of God? Basically as God himself, in a fiercely monotheistic society, which is the society that the disciples and Jesus himself and the early church operated in, right? So you got to remember that in such a society, it was supposed to be a death sentence to declare that a human being was God, unless he really was. So you really had to be sure of what you believed. You really had to be convinced. You really had to reason whether what you were believing was correct. Now, of course, the Gospel of John starts, in the beginning was the Word, or the Logos. What did this mean to the Gentile, the non-Jewish believer? The Logos was the Greek concept of the basis, of the source of reason and of order that we see in the world around us. And John took this word and said, this is, we saw him, we met him, we touched him, Jesus Christ. Thomas, who said, I'm not going to believe that Jesus is risen until I see and touch, the nail wounds in his hands and, the spear wound. And it's interesting that Jesus said, go ahead. No, this is a little bit, maybe a little bit too, I don't know, it makes me uneasy. So what is the place of doubt, not just in Christianity, but in life itself? And you'll see that in many, many instances, the disciples themselves doubted. And here's a very famous one of where Peter starts to walk in the water, and then he sees the wind and the waves crashing around him, and he begins to sink because of doubt. Of course, we saw the example of Thomas. Again, here's Peter walking on the water. And after the raising of Lazarus by Jesus from the dead, interesting is that some doubted, some still doubted. And so we ask ourselves, actually Jesus did predict this kind of thing. If you look at the story of Lazarus and the rich man, who both died, at the end of the story, where the rich man is in hell and asks Jesus to send somebody to warn his brothers, Jesus says, they have the law and the prophets. Even if someone comes back from the dead, they will not believe. Interesting, right? And it's interesting that even after Jesus himself rose from the dead and appeared to many people, some doubted. What about doubt itself? Doubt is not forbidden in the Bible. Doubt is something that's natural. It's normal to have doubts. I guess Keller puts it this way: a faith without some doubts is like a human body without any antibodies. See, if you've never doubted your faith, if you've never doubted what you believe, and this also extends to non-believers, right? If you've never doubted, once something comes along to instill that seed of doubt, you could be in big trouble because you've never really thought about what you believe and why you believe it. So how should we address doubt? Well, we should doubt it. We should examine the doubt itself. Take a closer look at it, right? Nothing wrong with that. So what are doubts really? Keller puts it this way: he says, every doubt is based on a leap of faith. All doubts are really a set of alternate beliefs. See, they're not just these pristine things that come in and poke holes in your faith. They're not just revealers of the truth. They're actually a set of beliefs in themselves, and we got to look at what those beliefs are. The challenge is to find the hidden faith. Find the faith that is hidden within the doubt, right? Within the reasoning that is brought on by the doubt. So, for example, the statement or the thought that there can't be just one true religion, right? What is that really saying? What is that really asking you to believe? Well, if you really examine it, and we will, in the near future, it's actually a claim to know more than everybody else. So it sounds like a humble claim. It sounds like a reasonable claim. But when we really look at what it's claiming, it's actually a really arrogant claim, right? So we will look at this. I don't believe in moral absolutes. Everyone should determine the moral truth for themselves. Again, it seems very humble, seems reasonable, but hidden in that doubt, hidden in that statement, is a deep belief in individual rights versus morality, right? And why do we say versus? Again, that's something to think about there. How do we doubt Christianity fairly? Right? So first, you got to discern what your alternate beliefs are. You got to think about what they really are, and then you got to examine the reasons for believing that. And if you don't do that, you're not really a skeptic. You're just a half skeptic. Right? I'm not sure what to call it. Maybe a septic or a skeptic or a skeptic. But right, you're not. If you don't really look at your own beliefs and examine them, you're not really a skeptic. You like the name, but you're really just a half skeptic. So you got to be consistent in the amount of proof required. Right? If you don't require all that much proof for your skepticism, why are you requiring much more proof for Christianity? What are the benefits of each side examining their doubts? Well, if you really do examine your doubts, then you'll have more respect for both sides, right? When you examine why they believe these things, we see that they're not just crazy. Okay, they have reasons, and you got to examine the reasons, and see why they believe these things. It will increase our civility and our humility if we really take a look at what the other side believes, instead of just mocking the other side. We can see where we ourselves are falling short. There are things there are accusations that may be hurled at us from the other side, and sometimes those accusations have some meat to them. They're showing where we're falling short in our own lives according to our own beliefs, right? So now Keller himself, he said, when he was younger, he said, I seem to see two camps before me, and there was something radically wrong with both of them. The people most passionate about social justice were moral relativists, while the morally upright didn't seem to care about the oppression going on all over the world. So he said both sides have problems. Now we're going to examine things like claims of belief by reason alone. Now again, this is a very popular claim, right? You see and hear this all the time. The heroes live by reason alone, but do they really? We'll take a look at that. We'll look at meaning and freedom, identity, morality, and hope. All these things are to be reasoned, doubted, and examined based on your belief framework or your unbelief framework, which is really a belief framework. So we got to look at the absorbed beliefs that we all have, right? Things that we take for granted as true just because the TV says it, just because we read it in a book. And here are some examples of things you hear all the time, and you may have absorbed without questioning, right? Without really examining it. You don't have to believe in God to have a full life of meaning, hope, and satisfaction. Oh, right? Sounds very attractive. You should be free to live as you see fit, as long as you don't harm others. Again, a very popular view. You become yourself when you are true to your deepest desires and dreams. Again, very attractive and seemingly enlightened. You don't have to believe in God to have a basis for morality. Oh, here's another big one. There's not much evidence for God or Christianity. Again, very popular belief. But we will examine these because they are beliefs. They're beliefs that either have evidence behind them or not. One thing we got to kind of take a look at is the meanings of secular. And when we talk about society, what we mean by secular is the separation of religion and state. When we talk about the individual, generally we're talking about an agnostic. It could be an atheist, but just the more general case. I'm not really sure. Don't know. Can't know. When we talk about secular culture, we're talking about the emphasis on here and now. Carpe diem, right? You got to seize life. You got to seize pleasure. You got to seize your goals, your dreams, your desires. Why isn't religion dead? John Lennon famously said, Christianity will go. It will vanish and shrink. I needn't argue about that. I'm right and will be proved right. Well, what happened since he said that? Instead, evangelical and Pentecostal Christianity is growing all over the world. For example, in sub-Saharan Africa, in China, Latin America. Why? Totally unexpected, right? Something is missing from our lives. And people have found it in evangelical and Pentecostal Christianity. We have these intuitions that there's something transcendent beyond us, right? And we hunger for that. We're looking for that. And lastly, faith is becoming more and more reasonable. Today, we have more and more incredibly good arguments for the truth of Christianity than 1 decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, 50 years ago. All the arguments against Christianity have just fallen down due to new discoveries and new scholarship. Right? So we'll look at these things. Kind of a preview. We got to look at the humanist dream that the decline of religion, for example, would lead to less warfare, less conflict, less violence, and instead, what happened in the so-called modern era with 2 world wars, right? And the humanist ideals did nothing to stop them. The song, imagine there's no heaven, imagine there's no hell, no possessions. Has it really been tried? Well, it has. and the results have been horrible, right? Communist regimes, which were anti-church, anti-Christianity, just committed the most horrible massacres, and the worst part of it, it was perpetrated on their own citizens. So 120 million at least killed, probably more, right? And we got to versus the Inquisition, the bugbear of secular thought. The Inquisition, which executed maybe 4,000 people over a period of 350 years. The Salem witch trials executed 25 people. Now in Europe, more, maybe 100,000 in Europe. But has it been tried? Yes. And these are the memorials to the victims of communism. So here we see the memorials to victims of communism in Prague and Budapest. Another thing we got to think about is there are actually shifts going on in secular thought. Here we have a quote from a graduate student in political theory from China, who said, "Science alone cannot prove human equality." Why is that? Right? We have this notion that all humans are equal, but why can't science prove that? Well, I mean, the most obvious thing, if you look around the world, is that no one is equal. Some are taller, some are shorter, some are stronger, some are weaker, some are, some have more power, some have less power, more wealth, less wealth. And even just looking from the scientific, the physical viewpoint, there is no equality, right? And that was the whole idea, really, of Darwinism, that there isn't equality, and that there is a struggle, and the stronger have to rule over the weak. So there is a growing opinion among Chinese social science that the Christian idea of transcendence was the historic basis for the concepts of human rights and equality. You don't have to be a Christian to see this. Zhou Jinping, a member of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress of China and director of the Institute of World Religions, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, said this: "Only by accepting this Christian understanding of transcendence as our criterion can we understand the real meaning of such concepts as freedom, human rights, tolerance, equality, justice, democracy, the rule of law, universality, and environmental protection." This is 1997, and of course it swung back. We don't know how much freedom they have to say things like this anymore. So the conundrum is that Christianity holds to original sin, the concept of original sin, yet protects and enhances the dignity of human beings, whereas much Confucian thought promotes the original goodness of human nature, yet in practice has undermined human rights. Completely opposite starting points, yet the Christian worldview is the one that protects the dignity of human beings. And it's not just China. Also among the most respected secular thinkers in the West, such as Jürgen Habermas, first of all, he recognizes that science cannot adjudicate morality or define good. Again, this is something obvious to all of us, which is, who manages to define the right thing or the good thing to do in the Darwinistic viewpoint, it's the strongest, right? You got to remember, eugenics, for example, was the child of Darwinism. And again, it's based on weeding out the weak. Science-based social policy, right? Eugenics. It advocated the sterilization or internment of persons deemed to have defective genes. See, otherwise they would be spreading disease, immorality, and crime. This is based on a rational, scientific cost-benefit analysis. It was endorsed by the Scopes textbook, which you've heard so much about. And by the way, if you really do your research on that movie, which they show to all students for some reason, Inherit the Wind, the characterization of the people and the trial itself was mostly fiction. Firstthings.com has an article about this called "The Truth About Inherit the Wind." Look for that. And answersingenesis.org, they have an article, "Inherit the Wind, an Historical Analysis." Why are they selling these fictional accounts to children? Interesting, right? Education, they call it. So do we still endorse eugenics? Why or why not? Was it discredited by science? Of course not. It was discredited by World War II, by the moral horror and shock that we felt, right? Which is not a scientific judgment, it is a moral judgment. Again, Jürgen Habermas, who currently ranks as one of the most influential philosophers in the world, said this, and people went bananas when it was paraphrased by a politician, but he said, "The ideals of freedom, of conscience, human rights, and democracy are the direct legacy of the Judaic ethic of justice and the Christian ethic of love. To this day, there is no alternative to it." Now remember, he's a secular philosopher, and there was just it was just a bombshell when this was quoted just not too long ago by someone else. He said, no, he never said that. He didn't say that. They translated it direct from the German, and that's pretty much what he said. Sorry. Here's another clue. This is from Mozart's Requiem. You know that there's something going on in the world that secular views have not accounted for. Agnostic Julian Barnes, moved by this Mozart's music, said, "What would it be like if it were true?" There are times when we are hit by such experiences of overwhelming beauty that we feel forced to use the term spiritual to explain our reaction, versus the viewpoint, is that all there is? So, of course, evolutionists like Steven Pinker and so on, they say, well, these experiences, they're just survival traits. And if you believe that, then Keller says, if you are being swept up in joy and wonder by a work of art, it will impoverish you to remind yourself that this feeling is simply a chemical reaction that helped your ancestors find food and escape predators and nothing more. So in order to appreciate beauty in art, things like this, you need to shield yourself from this view. Another way that he puts it is secularism flattens life. It takes away the feeling, the intuition that beauty and art are something more than just survival traits. So here are some obstacles to secularism. We find the experiences of fullness, beauty, joy, and the other, right? That intangible feeling of transcendence. Meaning, fulfillment, love, morality, justice, art, and beauty. These are all flattened. These are all taken away by secularism. Death, right? The problem of death. Steve Jobs said, it's strange to think that you accumulate all this experience and it just goes away. So I really want to believe that something survives, that maybe a consciousness endures. So it seemed to him untrue to reality that the human self, something that's as significant as the human self, death would be just an off switch, a click and you're gone. So all these things that we treasure are only validated by the Judeo-Christian vision of life. Some questions and answers we will explore. For example, is the gospel too exclusive? Is it arrogant to claim the gospel is the truth? Aren't all religions the same? What about hypocrisy? What about hell? Is heaven just a bribe? Is there evidence for God? Hasn't science explained everything already? The goal really, as Keller puts it, is in both my preaching and personal interactions, I've tried to respectfully help skeptics look at their own faith foundations, while at the same time laying bare my own to their strongest criticisms. He said, as an atheist, I thought I lived a moral, community-oriented, concerned with social justice kind of life. But Christianity had an even higher standard, down to our thoughts and the state of our hearts. So if we looked at doubting Thomas, how did Jesus respond to his doubt? Right? Jesus gave him evidence. He gave him reasons to believe. And we can ask God ourselves, in fact, to say to God, help thou my unbelief. The faith that God demands of us is not a baseless faith. It's not an unfounded faith. It's not a blind faith. He does give us reasons to believe, but he also gives us reasons to doubt our doubts. Take a look at this in later classes.